novels prior to that. The first, probably one of her most famous novels was Young Adolf, which was based around the idea, the rumour that Adolf Hitler had come very briefly to Liverpool because his half-brother had been there. But, and then in 1984 she wrote another novel about the 19th century about a wife killer, a classical scholar who murdered his wife, and it became a cause célèbre in the Times. So it wasn't that she decided suddenly to stop writing novels that might have some connection to her personal life, and then wrote historical novels. She'd weaved those ideas in and out in the past. I think it was the case that the affair with Colin, which probably started around the late 70s, then affected her ability, because it had to be kept secret. It made it very difficult for her to write about her private life. So that then did become, writing historical novels then became a way of writing about those kinds of relationships, but under the guise of fiction, so or of other historical characters. So Samuel Johnson could be seen in some light as a stand-in for Colin, and Mrs. Thrale maybe a reflection of, well, both Mrs. Thrale and her daughter would both be sort of alter egos of Beryl, or different parts of Beryl. So, but I think one of the problems with trying to look at Beryl as an autobiographical writer is that there's no direct connection, really, even though she did go work as a student at the Liverpool Playhouse. There's not a real connection between her fiction and her life. She will often take a plot from something else, or something that happened to somebody else, and then incorporate it into the novel, and the characters won't necessarily be Beryl, even though they appear to, the lead or the narrator could be mistaken for Beryl. It is often somebody else, a friend that she's used the characteristics of. In one interview, she described the fact that she based Captain Scott on. She said she based Captain Scott on her father, but she said she also said she based Adolf in Young Adolf on her father as well. So you would have to try and decide how realistic a depiction of her father it really is, if it can encompass both Hitler and Captain Scott.
Yeah, two different characters. Yeah. Is that she had a traumatic rape when she was around 19. I mean, how much do you think that coloured her subsequent relationships throughout her life? Because that was quite early on.
Well, in one way, it was obviously a very traumatic experience, and she wrote about it at the time. The way she never really wrote about it either in her fiction or talked about it in her interviews. The way it came to light when I was researching the biography was I got sent her husband's journal. He wasn't married to her at the time, but he was sort of going out with her, but had put an end to the relationship at that point. This was at the start of 1952. She had moved down to London because she felt she was too upset by being in close proximity with this person that who had just finished their relationship. And while she was down there living in London, she met a man, and he invited her back to his place, and then he locked the door and assaulted her physically. quite violently knocked out one of her teeth. But the subsequent few days after that, she wrote a long letter to the man who would become her husband, Austin, describing the whole incident. And he was so shocked and moved by it that he wrote out the whole letter into his journal. And that's how the letter, or Beryl's experience of it, still exists. She didn't write about it. I mean, in the immediate aftermath, it made her subject to a number of things which rape therapists have talked about, which is low feeling of self-esteem and worthlessness. And she engaged in a series of relationships that weren't very healthy for her. And she never really came to terms with it enough to write about it, I think. She never processed. So, but it's difficult to tell exactly what impact it had on her. It had a serious impact at the time, but because she didn't write about it afterwards, it is then difficult to tell the degree to which she came to terms with it or processed it otherwise. Which had been turned into television programmes, and she just then also started work as a columnist for the Evening Standard. So she was in the process of transforming from a sort of literary personality who was known very well within her own literary set, but not very much outside of that, to a television personality and a newspaper columnist. And with that, she started getting more telephone calls, demands for appearances, letters, and it was all getting on top of her. So we met after I finished at the museum, and we got on. And so I started in that initial phase, just helping her sort out her post and her meetings and her appointments, and clearing that out of the way so that she had time to write.